for joining us. My name is Connie, and I'm the founder and president of Glacierwatch. Glacierwatch aims to connect scientists with activists, with artists, and the general public. And today we want to talk about how artists witness the melt. Let me introduce you to Lucia, one of our wonderful volunteers of Glacierwatch, and soon Michigan State University's PhD student in environmental journalism. Lucia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Connie, for your introduction. I'm excited to share the voices that we've gathered today to celebrate a little bit in advance UNESCO's World Glaciers Day. We've gathered four amazing artists who make ice their subject. And with this, we want to invite you all to reflect the way that we have normally talked about or seen ice as maybe a passive stage for human adventures or for explorers to conquer, or as a purely scientific element. And instead, we will want at least attempt to reflect on ice as a live agent or as an element on its own. And to help us navigate this, as I mentioned, we have four amazing artists who bridge this gap between glaciology, the arts, and I will introduce them in due course, because together they provide different optics that transform this generally abstract or foreign or faraway data or images into more of a felt human reality. Before we move on, a little bit of housekeeping. The panel today will consist of each artist introducing themselves and their work in roughly 10 minutes. Then we will, 10 minutes each, and then we will move on to a 30-minute roundtable discussion to put all of our ideas together. And we will finish with about 10 minutes of questions from the audience to the artists. So if you have any questions for them, please put them in the comments on YouTube, where I believe you're joining us today. And we'll do our best to feature them at the end if they were not answered live already. Connie will be in the comments monitoring them, so she will share them with us so that we can answer them live at the end. So without further ado, let's move on to our first guest. So a little bit of an introduction. When we think of the cryosphere, we think of its visual impact, maybe white, grays, different shades of blue, and we will touch on that afterwards. We may also think of the cold, and some might even think of the taste or the smell of cozy wintry food. But how many of you have thought of the sound of the cryosphere? And to invite us to think about this is Nefer. She's a vocalist, composer, and performance artist whose work brings the cryosphere, and let me explain, cryosphere is the frozen world in our planet, into the realm of sound. She combines field recordings from glaciers and then with her voice, to create immersive compositions that translate the movement of the glaciers, the cracking of the glaciers, and the melting of the ice into a song, a piece of music. She has just been nominated as Performer of the Year at the Icelandic Music Awards, and we have to apologize, but she will not be joining us live because her family might be growing at any time now. She's in full pregnancy, so she will be joining us async because she was very kind to pre-record the answers for us just in case. So with that, we can play her answer.
Hello, I am Nefur. I am a singer, composer, performer, and facilitator. I make music with Glaciers. This means that I listen to them, I record their sounds, I sing with them, and all of this translates into original compositions, live performances, somatic workshops, a podcast, and a community of Glacier guardians called Glacier Drops, who receive a deeper dive and a deeper role. The approach to my work is to create with glaciers as sentient beings and as creative collaborators. And my goal in doing this is to support other humans to listen deeper to nature and engage with glaciers from a place of emotional connection. What prompted me to start working with glaciers was actually a dream that I had in my sleep in 2020. In that dream, I saw myself on a stage singing, performing with a glacier behind me that was making sounds with me as I was singing. The year after, I received a grant from Arts Council England to come to Iceland, meet the glaciers, listen to them, sing with them, and see where that would take me. With my work, I hope that more and more people get to be in relationship with glaciers, even if they are far away from them, that they get to listen to them and they develop an emotional connection with them as guardians of water of our planet. I hope that people attune themselves more to nature and that they learn from the voices of glaciers. I believe that when we really pay attention to nature and we listen with all of our senses, we can learn valuable lessons for our lives that can benefit the whole ecosystem of living beings on Earth. With my work, I also hope for the glaciers that are melting not to go alone and unheard and unnoticed. I hope that we can recognize them as elders and that we can be present and grateful while they go. And I think there's not much talk about that. Last year, the UN launched the International Year for Glacier Preservation and the first World Day of Glaciers. Now we are about to celebrate the second World Day of Glaciers. And last year, all that set me for attending several conferences in climate and cryosphere science. And I learned from scientists that whatever we do, 50% of the glaciers are disappearing anyway because of a carbon footprint, while the other 50% is that we can possibly save if we reduce emissions. And most of the conversation starts and stays in the potential saving of this 50%, which is understandable, but what about being present for the 50% that are dying? What about the emotional adaptation to post-glacial ecosystems? What about paying attention to these fast-melting glaciers while we still can? These glaciers that are melting are still alive. They have something to tell us. We have not been listening so far, and we are the last ones who can. So with the different offerings of my work, I aim to offer space for sensorial, emotional connection to these glaciers. And I try to do that without projecting our most logical narratives, but as a space where all emotions are welcome. There is space for grief, but there is also space for joy and ecstasy of being alive, as something that glaciers can remind us of. I also would like to share some ways to engage with my work, which can be listening to my album composed with glaciers called The Water, The Lover. You can also listen to my podcast called The Glaciers Song. You can experience my free glacier initiation audio session, or you can become a glacier drop for a full dive-in experience. Of course, you can also attend a concert or performance if it happens near you, and you can stay up to date through my newsletter or through my Instagram account, Nefor Music.
Perfect. Thank you, Nefer. And if you want to listen to her work, Connie has kindly put the link to Nefer's Bandcamp on the comments, and also her YouTube channel. She also has a podcast that you can follow, and you can follow all the amazing things that she works on over there. So please do give it a look after the discussion. Great. So with that kickoff, let's move to our first live panelist, and we are going to move to another way of experiencing ice, a bit more visual, with Sarah. So just to introduce the subject a little bit. So historically, um, the visual record of how we've documented human experience with ice was built on a view that normally showed the human against nature, right? These kind of narratives that we've seen in, for example, in stories like Frankenstein, or in all the images that we've seen of the human trying to conquer the poles, etc. Even nowadays, we think of adventure photography, climbers, skiers. It's the feat of conquering that summit. But today we want to go a little bit beyond of that view, towards a view that favors more like art that documents not just that feat of conquering that summit, but of showing ice as an element on itself. I don't want to talk too much about it because for that we have Sarah Backinger, a photographer and visual artist who explores these fragile landscapes of the alpine and polar environments. She documents their presence and transformation in this warming world by looking closely at the textures, the light, and the movement of ice to show glaciers and snow as powerful yet vulnerable witnesses to the climate crisis. So Sarah, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and showcase a little bit of your work? Talk us what moved you to dedicate your work to this subject?
Thank you so much, Lucia. Hi, my name is Sarah Bachinger. I currently live in upstate New York, and I am an eco-artist and a filmmaker. My first encounter with glaciers wasn't until about 2022. I had read about them, had seen all of the visuals that you just explained about people making their way to the poles, and was always fascinated, but they never felt like something that I was closer connected to. I was curious, but never had that emotional connection. And so my first encounter with glaciers was on a trip to Iceland. I wasn't sure what to expect, and I definitely did not expect to come away with the sense of awe and emotion that I left that trip with. Coming home from that trip, I was not able to stop thinking about the glaciers and the impression that they left on me, and they quickly became the subject of my work, of my research inquiry, and not only from the perspective of seeing them there within their own space, but also using it as a catalyst to learn about the glaciation that had happened where I live and how that connection connected me more deeply with my space here in New York. From that moment, I created a short film that was really based on my experience with them, and also the grief that I had experienced upon really understanding how some of the glaciers that I encountered there were just rapidly melting. And within the space of a week that I had visited, we had visited one Sohaima Yokult at the beginning of the trip, and then again at the end. And the changes that you could see within that short time span were amazing, and something that really stuck with me as something that I wanted to look more deeply into and find a way to convey how I felt to other people. And so I created a film, Elegy for a Glacier, that was based on that experience and a poem that I had written about that experience, and then translated my visuals into a short film that dives really into not only the grief that I understood that I was going through in terms of knowing what I was witnessing with the glaciers, but also that sense of awe and connection to a space that's thousands of miles away from me, but that had left such a deep impression, and how that awe also transformed myself into wanting to be a better steward, to take care of the planet, both from elements that are thousands of miles from me, but now also in my own backyard. And so I use my art is within photography, within filmmaking, and also mixed media work, and find ways to really kind of intertwine science and art together, because they have this meeting point of curiosity and a meeting point of awe. And so finding ways to be able to convey that to the general public, to really get them interested and excited to learn about glaciers in the cryosphere.
Thanks, Sarah. And that's something that we were discussing just before, the need for creating that connection where we feel that maybe science it has overtaken the discourse in hard sciences, and it's difficult to reach that connection with the audiences. And connected to that, a little question to maybe poke your brain a little bit. So with your lens, you capture landscapes that are in the process of disappearing, of melting. So how do you use the lens to capture this fragile, in the end, it's aesthetics of a melting glacier or of a melting landscape?
I have a process when I go out into the field and capture these things where before I even lift a camera to my face, I allow myself to be very present in that space. And when we visit things like glaciers, we're usually in awe of the larger picture. You see their enormity, you see their fragility, and that sense of the larger landscape is usually what people really kind of are drawn to. But when you take the time to really go into a space, to settle into it, to close your eyes and listen to it, and put your hands on the ground and feel it, you become more attuned to those things that you're trying to connect to, and you begin to notice the small details within them that are usually often overlooked. And so when I'm focusing on these subjects and working with glaciers, I really try to immerse myself into those smaller details that people really don't take the time or don't have the times often to look into. And so it allows me to establish almost a very personal, intimate connection with the glaciers as their own agent and a subject in my work, and focus on those small things that really give them their unique characteristics.
Perfect, thank you. Sarah, and we're going to come back to you during the roundtable discussion, but in the meantime, where can the audience engage with your work? How can they connect with your filmmaking? How can they follow you?
Yeah, absolutely. I do have a website portfolio that's under sebachinger.com for my fine art work and my mixed media work, and also in the process of putting together work for my films under dirtpicturestudios.com. Perfect.
We'll make sure to put it in the comments later so that the audience can find it there. Right. As I said, we'll come back to you later, but let's switch our domain yet again from the visual, but now to the literary. So words to me specifically have a very special meaning because I come from the communications background, but I come more further from the journalistic side. So I work with words in a little bit of a different way than Katie does. Words allow us to give voice to those things we believe don't have one, and to convert them to a language that people can understand and connect with. Literature in general allows us to entertain the idea that glaciers are sentient. They listen, they remember, they respond to human behavior. And Katie Didden is a poet who did exactly that in her first book, The Glacier's Wake, in which she gives voice to glaciers and other nature forms, weaving together scientific insight, environmental reflection, and lyrical imagination. Her poetry invites readers to encounter landscapes such as glaciers and volcanoes, not simply as scenery or a backdrop, but as processes whose stories are entwined with our own. So Katie, could you please tell us about yourself and share a little bit of your work?
Thank you so much. So I am a writer, and I also am introverted, so I wrote a little script, and I also have a PowerPoint to share to go along with it. So I'm not sure if I'll present the whole thing, but I'm going to share my screen. Okay. A few weeks ago, I got this amazing email from Lucia inviting me to join Witnessing the Melt, this panel. And I jumped at the chance because I really wanted to learn more about the work of Glacierwatch. It just seemed like an amazing organization. Also, UNESCO's World Day for Glaciers, and especially the work of the other artists on this panel, was really drawn to this whole idea. So I want to express my gratitude for that. So what I'll do is I'll just give an overview of the questions and methodologies that drive me as a poet, and I'll read some poems along the way, including some glacier poems from my first book, The Glacier's Wake. So I'm a poet and I'm fascinated by geology. As a college student, I took geology classes and poetry workshops at the same time. So those subjects somehow fused in my mind. Thinking about large-scale tectonic and glacial forces activates my imagination. So to borrow Twyla Tharp's concept from her book, The Creative Habit, I tend to approach my subject matter from the focal length of great distance. You know, some people might have a close-up or middle distance, she says, but mine is great distance. So it's the panning shot over a vast landscape, or it's the soul-shifting cognitions of deep time. In my poems, I'm equally interested in human dynamics and the social contexts that mediate our experience of the environment. So they often take place, in tour groups or trail systems, how we encounter each other as humans in the face of these dramatic landscapes and how those experiences are mediated. My love for the environment is intuitive. I'm not the kind of person who knows the Latin names of trees or knows all about glaciology. I'm trying to learn. I'm also not a philosopher or a theologian that can debate whether features of the environment, not just trees and birds, but also rocks and ice are sentient. But I'm a poet, and I have a little shout out to Emily Dickinson. Like Dickinson, I dwell in possibility. As a writer, I make sense of experience by shaping it into patterns of form and especially patterns of rhythm. My ideas take shape in words. My trade is association. One thing is like another. The boundaries blur, so the brain can be a cedar chamber, and I can spread my hands wide to gather paradise. Maybe, like me, you felt the low hum of a wasp whir through your body before you heard it in your ear. I started to write poems in the voices of creatures and features of the natural world because of a wasp that would visit my studio and hover lethargically like a ghost. When it died, my neighbor, who knew the wasp was a muse, placed it on an index card and slipped it under my door, and she wrote this little line that said, R.I.P. Raphael. So I put it on my desk and I studied how it looked. It looked human and not at all human at the same time. And because the wasp was named Raphael, I wrote about archangels and Renaissance painters. And as I chose a form for the poems, let's see, I'm getting a little ahead there. As I chose a form for the poems, I felt the wasp would speak in short lines or short bursts of rhythm. And when I thought about what it would mean to see Caravaggio's painting, The Taking of Christ, through the eyes of a wasp, I noticed different things than I would have seen otherwise. It gave me a new angle of perception on both the painting and the gospel story. So after that, I wanted to know what the wasp thought about everything. What did the wasp think about weddings? What did the wasp think about Kierkegaard? So in my life, writing this poems changed my relationship to wasps. My fear mixes with a wider feeling of connection and curiosity. And it's not that I believe that wasps are human, but writing these poems helped me to consider their agency. As the poet Alexis Pauline Gumbs said in an interview, I think I have the quote here. She wrote in the voice of a manatee, and in this interview, she says, "It's not to make a manatee more human. It's to actually try to dissolve the idea of what human is, because that idea is blocking the communion and right relationship that we have to create." And I just love that quote. So I'm going to read one of the wasp poems to start. The Wasp on Renaissance Painters. Imagine the Virgin imagining figs. Paint a Mary who stares at a plate of sliced figs. Imagine the cherubs imagining figs. Imagine green, capucine yellow. Imagine mercurial vermilion in the black background of a body. See my oiled wing as the armor of Romans who grip in the post-kiss of Judas the luminous cursor of figs. Speaking in the voices of non-human creatures is not a new idea. The first poet that comes to mind is Ovid and the Metamorphoses. So after I wrote about the wasp, I also wanted to write in the voice of a glacier and the voice of a sycamore. So I developed a formula. So I assigned each of the characters a secret secondary persona. So the wasp is kind of a professor. And the glacier I modeled on Perito Moreno Glacier in Patagonia. And I'll just say, I've taken all these photos from the UNESCO website. So you can find them there, and you can find the attribution to the photographers there as well. So I had visited Perito Moreno in 2003. And when I was there, I was struck by how many people were taking pictures. So that was in 2003. And people were still using flash cameras. So it looked like the glacier was hounded by paparazzi. And so in my mind, the glacier is also a former Hollywood starlet, aging because the glacier was disintegrating before our eyes. This choice was intuitive, but when I think of it now, adding a second layer to the personification did several things. First, it helped me triangulate my descriptions and make them stranger, which was really important. And second, it helped me interrogate the tension between consumerism and conservation. It was somehow easier to imagine the stakes of melting glaciers by pairing it with the human condition of stardom, as if placing melting glaciers in a position of clickbait and star headlines was a way to make those urgencies more visible. So I'm just going to read 3 of those poems, and maybe I'll just read those and then end with a final quote. This is The Glacier on Middle Age. The threat of death breathes its heat on your neck, softens your features, finally teaches your youth to you. The inner light that shone in your face is snuffed by a rough powder, by boot scuffs. Yet compression gives an age-obscuring gleam, a startling blue. Your beauty is now up to you. Here's the glacier on the close-up. This is appropriate for today because it references Zoom. Here we go. The glacier on the close-up. Say you see interiors, bright blue where the water moves. Still, Zoom is hell on the weathered. When I was smooth as glass, I was a starlet, the mirror of Mars. Now merely a shield, beaming light on the body of Venus. And here's the glacier on lack of sleep. When day comes, the light's too bright. A yawn forms behind the spires of your eyes. Your jaw cracks, splits a crevasse. Little parts of you collapse. If you were older or cared less about being seen, you would lie down in public. So I'll just say after this Glacier's Wake, I wanted to continue in this format. So I wrote a whole book in the voice of lava. It's called Or Choir, the Lava on Iceland. And I used a particular poetic form for that. But I'm going to jump now just to a final quote that I really love, and that's from an interview with Bjork and Robin Wall Kimmerer. Here it is. And they were talking about animacy, and this is what Robin Wall Kimmerer said. I love the way that language reminds us of that animacy of the living world, that those rocks that you speak of are living beings, you know, with their own stories, their own history, their own gifts in the world. And that's something that is so precious to me about the Potawatomi language, is that everything's a verb. It isn't just a state of matter. It has agency, right? You know, it could create itself again. It could be something else. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was gorgeous. I do have a very quick follow-up question because you were talking about the poetic persona, so to speak, and we were talking about this before. So, if a glacier, if you could give the voice to a glacier today, what do you think they would be saying today, as we're standing?
Yes, thanks. I've been thinking about this for the last 15 minutes or so. And it was interesting because 2 things came up. The first thing that came up is I wanted to assign it to say something honoring Kimberly Crenshaw, the theorist of intersectional feminism. In my mind, I wanted it to speak to the world about the necessity of thinking in intersectional ways about how all of these crises that we're confronting are absolutely related to each other. But I thought maybe that that's me imposing a bit on it, and it's actually probably more mysterious. And I think what I would really want to hear from it is some kind of wisdom around nonlinearity, because one of the biggest things we're facing with the climate crisis are these nonlinear responses. We've never lived through patterns that we're living through now, so it's hard to map the future because we've never actually, we can only map the future if we have stable data, but because everything is unstable, we can't really predict what's going to happen. And so I think the glacier would have a lot to teach us about that.
Perfect. Thank you, Katie. We'll come back to you afterwards during the roundtable. Again, if, as I said before, if anyone has questions for our panelists, please put them in the comments, and we'll share them at the end, or otherwise we can keep the comments going and answer them afterwards. So for our last panelist, and last but not least, of course, we're sort of going to merge the visual and the lyrical. We're going to move into the canvas. And for that, we're going to bring Jessie Pitt, who is an artist, but she's also an adventurer. She's a mountain guide. So she walks the talk every day, let's say. Jessie Pitt is a contemporary artist based in the Austrian Alps, whose relationship with the mountains, as I said, goes beyond art. She's a professional mountain guide and researcher who doesn't just observe the cryosphere, she navigates it. Her work merges high altitude guiding with an interest into the personality of rock and ice. And same as with the other panelists, Jessie, if you want to give us an overview of what you do, who you are, your work, how you your Glacier series came to be and your mountain series came to be. The floor is yours.
Yeah. Hi. I'm an Australian actually, and I live in Austria. What brought me to Austria was the mountains. So I've always been deeply connected to mountains. I work and live in them pretty much my whole life. So that's how it became a big subject of my art. So it's all connected. Just to make clear, I'm not a mountain guide as such. I'm a ski guide. So I take people off piste. Yeah, also in high alpine, but not like on the mountain summer side, more winter. So I guess my art started with mountains anyway. It was always about the connection. At the beginning, it was about my personal connection to the mountains. As time went on and as time developed and things changed, it became a way of communicating nature in a way that we should be aware of. So our connection to nature. So how do we connect to it? How does it affect us? That humanity is part of nature and not separate from nature was a really important thing. And then as time went on, where I work, I guide also on a glacier. And so I've been seeing this glacier, which I've had an intimate relationship with over the years, melting. And it's kind of weird from 2 points of view. Like I see it from where I can ski, what I can't ski anymore. And then also aesthetically, like how it looks as it changes, more rocks come out, less ice. And I started a glacier series of work, which I depict or in a way document a glacier from it's like a point of view that is disappeared by the time my artwork is finished. So it's like a documentation of something that I visually see, and then as winter changes, like goes through winter and then it goes into summer, and then you come back into winter again, you see how much it's changed. It's kind of weird, but So in a way, I've become a documenter of Glacier, and Glacier that I see in the valley where I live mainly, because that's what I see and that's what I'm able to touch, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah. My art has a big connection to nature in the sense that it's not the artworks that I make. So the Glacier artworks are quite big. They're like 2 meters by 140. And so the idea behind that is a way of immersing people in Glacier and bringing it down to maybe a different way of looking at ice and something that we're losing. And then I guess it can communicate a way of thinking about ice or glaciers and how they connect to you personally, either through cultural memory, so people who live with glaciers all their life in where they live, or also then obviously water security for mountainous areas and then outside of mountainous areas. So it's kind of like a snake. It kind of like keeps growing in different ways and moving around and stuff. So that's kind of how that happened. I have this other project which is called the Connection Project, where I bring my art back into the mountains. So I either like hike up and sleep overnight, and I kind of exhibit my artwork in nature. So there's no one there except me. So it's kind of like a weird sort of thing, but it's like just to strengthen that connection between what inspires me, but also the connection that we have as humanity to nature. I think it's really important that humans think and remember that we are part of nature and not separate, that we're a part of Earth and not separate, and we only exist because of Earth. So, you know, I think humanity thinks often that we're very separate, but we're not. It's all the same. So, yeah. So, part of the Connection Project, I've a couple of winters I painted the glacier, which I see every day, and then the next season I would like put it outside in front of the glacier in the state that it is now with the state that it was. And so that's kind of something that's ongoing as well. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. So it's another way of documenting the evolution of the glacier beyond those more technical ways that we are more used to seeing the documentation being or the data being taken in. Jesse, I have one of the questions that I mentioned that I would ask. So as a guide, you've seen mountains in what we mentioned or we described as moods, in different moods and different weathers, different states, or different evolutions of, like you mentioned, of the glacier. What is there a specific mood of the mountain or of the glaciers that is the most interesting for you to capture in your canvas that you want to transmit to people, to your audience? Oops, I think Jesse's frozen. We can hear you. I think that your image is frozen, but we can hear you. Yeah, good.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess like I really like moods. I like moments. So I like fleeting moments. I like interesting light. I like the way that mountains change the way they are in relation to clouds and rays of light or random light, dark light, light, clouds that move, come and go. It's fleeting moments that they create a mood, I guess, you know, that's what makes the mountains. So I'm not really interested in like a mountain that's flooded with light, and I'm not really interested in as much in the classic, like very much contrasted shadow sun, which you see often. I kind of would prefer to depict or to show interesting light that you really just see, that's just a moment, that's just, yeah, so that's kind of how that happens. Yeah. And with the glacier, yeah, I guess with the glacier it's different because I'm kind of like depicting something that I see, but I still need the light in there. So sorry. Yeah.
So we are going to come back to you afterwards, as I mentioned to everyone. But sorry, before I move on, Jessie, if you want to share where the audience can find your work, so that they can view it, either if you have your website, Instagram accounts, etc., that we can share on the comments so that people can visit.
I'm on Instagram, JessiePitt_art, I think, and my website, obviously, which is more of a portfolio and also thing, which is jessiepitt.com. It's pretty easy. Yeah.
Perfect. We'll share it on the comments afterwards. And sorry, Katie, I didn't ask that question to you, but is there any medium that you would want people to find you in?
I also have a website, so it's also katiedidden.com. So
okay, perfect. We'll share it in the comments as well. Perfect. We are going to move to the round table. We hope that everyone feels a little bit more familiar with the artist's works and perspectives and what informs their processes and so on. So let's bring this all together. We've seen that most, if not all, our panelists from today portray the cryosphere beyond the scientific gaze. If anything, they merge it into their processes. They don't ignore it, which is the interesting part of this. So they all seek to create this emotional connection, or to transfer this emotional connection that they have with their audiences. So to explore this, I want to dig a little bit more into this. We will propose some questions to our panelists. I will ask a question. I have a set of questions here that are specific for each panelist. So I will ask each of you one of them, and then I'll ask more like general questions that whoever feels inspired to answer can jump in, and then we can build up on that to generate a discussion. It doesn't matter, then that takes the whole rest of the time. So let's make it a bit more conversational. The only thing that I ask is that you don't interrupt each other so that the audio doesn't cut off, but keeping mindful of time, because we do have about 30 minutes for this discussion. Keep answers interesting, but mindful of the time. So let's start with Sarah, who we've kept silent for a little bit. So when framing a shot, how do you use visual techniques to make a glacier feel less like a thing and more like a someone, so that the audience can connect at a more personal or emotional level in your filmmaking or in your photography?
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier, just really focusing on those details. And something I learned in a workshop recently that I was in that has stuck with me, and it was something I kind of touched upon, but didn't really have the words to put through it, is when I'm looking through my lens, it's not just me and how I'm framing it, but I'm thinking of all of the audience that would be looking at that too. So what is it that I want to share with the audience from the spaces that I'm in? And what is it that the Glacier wants to share with the audience as well? So really taking the time to connect with the space in an overall perspective, but becoming and focusing more detailed and going more and more and more. So with some of the equipment that I use, I'll start with a wide angle. I might have a drone with me if that's allowed in this space, but I'm also very conscious about what I bring with me as well. So it's not overwhelming. But then I also have macro lenses where I can go right up to the ice and photograph what's inside the ice and the air bubbles that are there that have been trapped there for hundreds or thousands of years, and really diving into those details that really bring into the characteristics of the glacier, and being able to really encompass it from a wide space to a very narrow space. I also do a lot of field recordings while I'm there, so I use those in the videos that I create, and going into some other technical aspects of the work that I do too. I do a lot with code and taking sound and turning that into code and then using that to make visualizations as well. So I really take time to be with the glacier to really get to know the different aspects of the glacier, from sound and, like you mentioned before, from smell and touch and all of that, and finding ways to encompass all of those elements and all of those quirks and personality traits that a glacier has, and bringing that into the visual work that I present.
Perfect, thanks. And this leads me perfectly into my next question for Jessie, actually, because I think it kind of leads a little bit into that. You spend a lot of time in the field during your guiding and so on. So when you spend that time in the field, how does your physical presence on the land inform the way that you will eventually put that glacier or that mountain in your work or in your canvas?
I think because as a ski guide, I'm very aware of the changes that happen. So snow, how the snow is changing, how the weather affects the snow, where can I ski, where can I not ski. So I have like an intimate relationship with the mountains in a way that, yeah. And I think the way I look at the mountains as a skier and a guide, and the way that I look at it as an artist, is very connected. So I have a very intimate view of mountains, glaciers, and the landscape. Like, hard to explain, but I think that makes sense. Yeah. So.
And it totally makes sense. There's times where an emotional connection is very difficult to put into words, and that's why these different forms of art exist, because it's the best way that one has to express it. But I guess that words are Katie's thing, so we can move on to the next question. It's segueing perfectly here. Katie, we mentioned before that in your work you also intertwine some scientific observation, scientific data. Is there, what's the process for that? How do you turn scientific terms or information into a poem, for putting it very simply?
Yes, it's actually a really exciting process. And I think, Sarah, something you said about the commonality between scientists and artists is curiosity. I also think there's a love of language, and that oftentimes the scientific vocabulary is quite beautiful. It doesn't happen easily for me. I often have to have these drafts if I'm integrating scientific information. And you wouldn't see it so much with the glacier poems that I read, but in the lava book or in another poem in the glacier book about avalanche, I was really doing a lot of reading about the process of the avalanche and hearing about survival stories. And, it kind of starts as a, I don't know, an unwieldy form, and then just sort of listening for the rhythm, and finding then eventually the rhythm is what makes it seamless, and the form makes it more seamless. So yeah, I think there's a real interest in poetry in what we call docu-poetics, which is kind of the combination of other disciplines and poetry. So I'm super interested in that. I'm working on a project about the weather right now, and that's also been a lot of my process, trying to learn. I'll never be an expert in these fields, but it's amazing. I'll spend months researching, and then it'll just be one word in the poem that nobody else knows how hard earned that one word was. But that's part of what I'm loving about this form of working, is I'm just learning about so many different subjects.
And sounding as if you knew what you were talking about when you actually do, but sounding very authoritative in the subjects. So there's one thing that I did want to highlight in everyone's work, is that ice, glaciers, snow, the mountains, this cryosphere, as we mentioned before, landscapes are not just a backdrop of your work. They are not the stage in which something happens, but they are the protagonist of your work, right? So this question goes for everyone, and whoever feels compelled to answer first can jump in, and then we can build on that. So how do you ensure the ice acts as a protagonist in your works, especially when communicating to audiences who are used to seeing it as what I mentioned before, which is a landscape behind the person, let's say? Whoever wants to jump in, otherwise I'll call someone out.
I can jump in.
Yeah.
One thing that I've been discovering in trying to get towards like, for example, making the ice the protagonist is, how do you find a voice for that? And it seems like it's always leading me towards plurality. That either it's working with collaboration, like a lot of the work that I'm doing with lava or weather, it turns into all these other interdisciplinary forms. Like there's a composer setting the lava poems, or my friend is helping me create these image texts to represent. So that's been fascinating to me, and it's not something I've steered. It's more like the subject kind of, in order to represent it, it's kind of leading to a different understanding of voice. Like, and I think that's the word I would use, is plurality.
Perfect. I don't know if Sarah, yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, no, I really love that, Katie. And I find myself in the same space too with my visual work, and that even the painting behind me is inspired by glaciers. And it might not look like it, but it's actually mud from the glacier that was here in New York 11,000 years ago. And there's this particular site that I go to where I can collect it, where it's been exposed, and utilize that to make visual art. I've made these sculptures as well from that glacial clay. And so it's the glaciers are manifesting in different ways that are very unexpected. And with the curiosity and the research aspect that you also brought up, I love science. I've always loved science, and I've always had my art brain and my science brain, and the glaciers have allowed those to come together in very unexpected ways too. And so with some of the other visual art I do, I've incorporated my photography to use that as a mechanism for some ideas for paintings, and then brought science into it, where I have been using paint that's very reactive to heat. And so I've taken the photographs of glaciers that I've done and started to translate them into paintings using this paint. And if these paintings are placed in an area that are sunny or warm, the paint will actually disappear as if the ice was melting. And so trying to find ways to bring in scientific aspects, but also that sense of care as well, that we need to care for our environment. And if we don't, it will not be there anymore. And so utilizing that in a visual way too, where you can actually do that in a tangible, very quick time to really understand those effects, have started to come into my work as well. So the glacier is just kind of dictating all of these different pathways that my work has taken that I was not expecting, but I'm welcoming and opening and seeing how and what avenues I'm able to use that to really connect with different audiences that might find one art form or another more interesting and able to connect with.
Perfect. Thanks both. I don't know, Jesse, if you had something, wanted to add something, or we can move on to them. Yeah.
No, I just think that like to the scale of my artwork, I guess it brings ice in a different view. But I think that in general, I think art, poetry, music, in relation to glaciers, is a way of bringing the ice in a different way to the people. So, and then it can trigger things like memory. So like here, you know, you have people, local people who've been living here generations and have lived through, there was a time when the glaciers were a threat and now they're retreating. And so there's old artworks from a few hundred years ago where they have the face of the glacier as a monster. And it's like this monster that's coming down and threatening everyone, the villagers, through floods and stuff. And now it's kind of retreating so much. So I think it triggers maybe memories that where the ice in the way that people start thinking about it again and how it's going to affect them now. So the way the ice affects people before and how it affects now, and their awareness of ice changes through time. So I think if you outside of science, then you can use ice or art and ice to trigger these thoughts. I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Definitely the urgency, and as you said, that it kind of connects with what I was mentioning before, that view of ice or the mountain or the glaciers as something that's something we have to protect us against or maybe conquer. Great. And I'll piggyback on that for my next question also to the floor. And the theme basically from today has been, how can we make people care about the climate crisis, but very specifically about glaciers, or glaciers in all their shapes, mountain glaciers, ice sheets, etc. How can we get people who might never have seen a glacier in their life to care about these elements, these features of our landscape? So the very specific question would be, how can art serve as a Trojan horse to smuggle in this, urgency of the climate crisis through emotion and empathy rather than just evidence? And maybe each of you can speak, how can that be done in each of your art forms? Katie, since you started the last one, do you want to kick off this one?
I can give that a go. It's interesting because I teach creative writing in the environment, and I had a breakthrough the last time I taught that, because I realized I kept wanting them to describe their environment, have their sit spot, but the missing element was really connecting with each other, and how there was a sense of, yeah, exactly, what's the way of having a human connection with each other and the environment. So yeah, and I was actually asking a friend, another artist, Jacinda Russell, about this, and she reminded me that, well, we were saying, like, can art make a difference, or is the fact of writing this about trying to persuade people in some way? And her answer was so lovely. She goes, it's more about witnessing. It's more about saying, I was there, and not really imposing an agenda on it, but having this kind of documentation or a sense of noting the moment, the momentousness of encounter. And that, yes, that could be transformative, or even just, if people aren't actually at the glacier, if we're representing that feeling of encountering a glacier, there's a sense of here-ness or something. And perhaps that, without trying to make it persuade someone, is itself a way of creating a connection. That's all I'll say.
Perfect, thanks. Sarah, if you want to take over.
No, I love that. That's beautiful. And I feel that, like, art can act as a catalyst for dialogue. It can open up a door to that curiosity, to that awe, to storytelling. And I think storytelling, whether it's visual storytelling, audio, through words, is such an important aspect of who we are as humans, and our way of being able to convey that emotion and those places of witnessing. And I think that's what art really has a capacity to do, is to take data, take experience, and bring that into a way that someone who has researched those things or been to those places can share that with others and add that human element to it and that human emotion to it that can make someone inspired to go look into these things themselves and to do their own research or to make their own art and to be able to find their own mechanism of connection. And I think that it has the possibility to open those pathways of empathy. And once we start to care about those things and learn more about those things, we start to care more. And as we care more, we are more inspired to protect those places. And whether those places are in our backyard or thousands of miles away, finding those pathways of connection that I think art really can provide is vital to being able to become better stewards.
Thank you. Jessie, if you want to run this question up.
I guess I don't really have much to add because they both communicated pretty much what I think as well, and I think what we all think. So yeah, I would just agree.
Perfect. And to round us up for the round table, and I think we're pretty much on time right now. We haven't been too over time, so that's great. I have one last question, which is I'm not going to go through the very specific cases in detail that I'll mention, but maybe afterwards, if you're interested in that, the audience can search for them. But we've seen the limits of science in events like the flooding of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, where we are storing seeds from every country of the world for the worst case scenario, but due to the permafrost melt, the seeds were in danger of being damaged. And also more on the artistic side, Olafur Eliasson's installation Icewatch, where he brought big ice chunks from Greenland and placed them in different cities of the world to show people the actual process of the melt. So this is pretty much ways of communicating the urgency of this matter, that we need to move into some sort of action, right? What do you think that science is missing that art and again, maybe your specific art forms or art mediums can provide to this conversation? It's a little bit piggybacking on the last one. What do you think is the power specifically of painting, of poetry, of filmmaking, of photography, of anything that you want to add on that? And maybe Jessie, we can start with you if you want to comment on this.
I mean, I think it touches a lot on what we've already talked about, but I think it is the human connection and the emotional connection, which science is very data orientated, and I guess art, poetry, documentaries, film, music can bring the human connection to the data, I guess. So it make it more personal, more touchable, seen, felt, heard, so that it's something that's more tangible. And I guess in that way, it can make people think about how it affects them, or how will it affect them if we lose glaciers? Like, is it something that just affects people who live in the mountains, or is it going to affect other people that live way downstream of glacier melt, for example? I think it's like this.
So bringing it more to the sensory field where people can actually, as I mentioned, touch, feel, see in first person, but maybe a representation to generate empathy. Thank you, Jessie. I don't know if Katie or Sarah want to add on that.
I could say, just building on that, what Jessie said, I think it made me think about, I think of rhythm in a kind of mystical way, that there's something that when I'm trying to write to a rhythm, it's something beyond myself, that I'm kind of tapping into an eternal force or something. So, and I think it relates to memory. So maybe what a writer can offer to the scientific language is the rhythm that helps it stick into the human memory and helps it be transferred, that therefore helps it be shared.
Sarah, I don't know if you want to add something else to that, or
No, I think they both covered that beautifully, and I'm definitely on that same wavelength.
Perfect. Thank you to the three of you for joining us today. It was a little bit of a whirlwind because of all the timings with UNESCO and so on, but we truly appreciate you three and Nefer, of course, for your participation. I think that this is a great opportunity to bring into this World Day of Glaciers this talks that I feel we might be missing to be featured a bit more. And on that, UNESCO has just declared this, or has, as they said it, they handed over the year of glacier protection that was last year into the decade of cryosphere protection. So I think that these are conversations that we're going to start hearing a bit more in that. We should also move to make them heard among all the noise and the conversations that are going to be had around the science, the policy, and all that. But I think art needs to be featured more to actually get to that audience who might be turning a deaf ear to that the type of language that doesn't impact them anymore. So I think that we're right in time, and apparently we don't have any questions in the comments for the time being. This is being recorded on YouTube, and it's going to be posted on the same YouTube link where the stream was happening. So if there are any further questions afterward from after watchers, we will pass them on to our panelists and we will answer them in the comments. But yeah, I wanted to ask you if you have any closing remarks, any closing comments before we wrap it up today. Nope. Okay, perfect. Great.
Just to say,
yeah,
just to say thank you, and kind of so happy that you put this conversation together, and I just keep wanting to continue the conversation. So that's also
this can go for hours.
kind of a wonder that you introduced all of us and how beautifully you organized this. So thank you.
This conversation can definitely keep going. We have the whole decade of attention. So happy to continue this conversation over further panels or over social media, other sort of initiatives. So thank you, Kitty. And thank
Yes,
you everyone for joining us. Great. I think our time is up. So I wanted again to thank everyone, not just our panelists, but those who joined us live and those who will join us afterwards with the recording. And yeah, I think this is a great note to wrap the pre-day of Glaciers, which is actually on the 21st of March. And yeah, please do find us on social media. We're on Instagram, we're everywhere around. If you want to keep this conversation going, if you want to get in touch with the artists, please do so through the social media and the links that we've shared in the comments. So thank you very much, everyone.